For 38 years my husband went to the bank every single Tuesday, and after he passed away I finally learned why, and the truth left me completely shattered. What I uncovered in his safety deposit box erased everything I believed about our marriage, because every paper inside told a story of deception, broken trust, and choices he never shared with me, including a final letter that changed my life in ways I never expected. But before I explain what I found, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Tuesday had always been sacred in our routine. Without fail, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, Thaddeus would grab his keys, straighten his tie, kiss my forehead, and say he was heading to the bank to take care of business. Rain or shine, nothing ever stopped him, and I never once questioned it because he was a careful, disciplined civil engineer who kept our life running smoothly. Our bills were always paid, our credit was spotless, and money problems never entered our home, all because he insisted on handling every financial detail himself. He would smile and tell me to focus on the house and the children while he managed the numbers, and I trusted him completely, believing we were a strong team built on honesty. He was there for our children's milestones, our family's losses, and every celebration in between, and for decades, I truly believed that the man who shared those moments with me had also shared the truth, that I never had a reason to doubt him, and the final Tuesday of his life looked no different from the dozens of years before it. It was March, warm and heavy in Philadelphia, and at exactly 2 o'clock he left the house like always, his routine steady and familiar. I kissed him goodbye, straightened his collar, and reminded him to drive safely, and he smiled with that calm confidence I had known for nearly 4 decades before answering that he always did. I went on with my afternoon and headed to the Reading Terminal Market, standing in the produce aisle choosing oranges when my phone rang. It was our oldest son, Langston, and his voice sounded controlled in a way that immediately frightened me, like he was holding back something unbearable. He told me to come to the hospital right away, and before he could explain more, my chest tightened and my hands went numb. I rushed out, leaving my groceries behind, barely able to start the car as fear took over, and drove faster than I should have, whispering prayers the whole way. When I reached the hospital and saw Langston waiting in the hallway, his face pale and defeated, I understood before he said a word. My husband had collapsed at work and never recovered, gone suddenly at 59 despite living a healthy, careful life. I didn't cry then, and people later said it was shock, but it wasn't that at all. Instead, I felt a strange stillness inside me, like a door had quietly opened, leaving me breathing in a way I hadn't noticed was missing for years. For the first time I felt a sense of freedom, and that feeling frightened me more than losing him. I kept asking myself what kind of wife feels relief after her husband dies, and what that said about the life I had been living. The funeral was held on a rainy Saturday, and Mother Bethlehem Church was filled to the doors with people praising Thaddeus for being disciplined, dependable, and honorable. His co-workers spoke, old friends from his college days nodded in agreement, and neighbors shared stories that painted him as a man everyone admired. I listened politely, dressed in black, thanking people for their kind words, flowers, and meals, yet I felt oddly detached, like they were describing someone I knew only from a distance. Zadie cried openly the entire service, always having been closer to her father, while Langston tried to stay strong, though I saw his tears when the casket was finally closed. Inside me there was no rush of grief, only a quiet emptiness that I couldn't explain. 2 days later, on Monday morning, a plain white envelope arrived with my name typed neatly on the front and no return address. I opened it casually, never expecting what it held, and read a formal letter from Union Trust Bank informing me that I was listed as a joint holder of a safety deposit box my husband had maintained. As I reread the words slowly, a sense of unease settled in because I had never known such a box existed, and I realized that even after 38 years of marriage, there were parts of my husband's life I had never truly seen. I stared at the letter in disbelief, my mind stuck on the words safety deposit box, because I had never heard of it before, not once in all our 38 years together. Thaddeus had never mentioned a box, never hinted at secrets, never given me a reason to question him. My hands were shaking as I called the bank, my heart pounding while a calm, professional representative confirmed that yes, there was a box registered under both our names, and yes, I had full access to it. She scheduled me for Wednesday morning at 10, and those next 48 hours felt endless. I barely slept, drifting through the house like a stranger, opening drawers, checking folders, rereading documents, searching for any sign that I had missed something all these years. Everything looked perfect on the surface, neatly labeled files, bills paid on time, my husband's careful handwriting everywhere. Yet a deep uneasiness settled in my chest, the kind you feel when something is wrong but you can't explain why. On Tuesday night, Langston came by looking worn down and shaken, and when he said, "Mom, we need to talk," my stomach tightened. We sat at the kitchen table as he laid out a thick folder filled with financial papers from his father's office, documents I had never seen before. As he pointed to a bank statement and explained that my joint account, the one I believed was secure, now held barely $1,200, the room seemed to spin, and I realized this mystery was far bigger and more painful than I had imagined. I felt my chest tighten when Langston said the number out loud, because it made no sense at all, and I kept repeating that it had to be a mistake since we always had money coming in from both my pension and my husband's paycheck. Langston showed me the statements anyway, his voice low and careful as he explained that the balance really was almost nothing. And then he added that the savings account we relied on for emergencies had been closed months ago without my knowledge. When he told me he couldn't find any trace of the retirement funds or investments either, it felt like the ground dropped away beneath me, as if everything solid in my life had suddenly vanished. I kept insisting there had to be records somewhere because my husband worked his entire life and was always careful with money. But even after calls to the bank and the accountant, there was nothing to point to. That night, sleep never came as I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying nearly 4 decades of Tuesdays in my mind, wondering what he had really been doing during those weekly trips to the bank. Small memories I once ignored began to surface, moments when he came home quiet or tense and brushed off my questions with a tired smile, and I realized how easily trust had kept me from asking more. When Wednesday morning arrived under a cold gray sky, I dressed slowly and deliberately, choosing simple clothes that made me feel steady, and as I looked at myself in the mirror, I knew I wasn't just going to the bank, I was preparing to face the truth of a life I thought I understood. That I studied my reflection and noticed the fine lines around my eyes, signs of years lived with care and routine, yet I suddenly wondered what that life had truly been built on. Langston offered to come with me to the bank, but I refused, knowing that whatever waited inside that safety deposit box was something I needed to face on my own, without explanations or comfort. The bank itself felt cold and impersonal, all glass and steel, and the manager who greeted me spoke kindly, repeating how respected and admirable my husband had been, a word I was beginning to question deeply. She led me down to the vault, past rows of identical metal boxes that held other people's secrets, and stopped at number 1847. Opening it carefully before leaving me alone. I carried the heavy box into a small private room, sat under the harsh light, and waited until my racing heart slowed just enough to move. When I finally opened it, I found neatly arranged folders, each labeled in my husband's familiar handwriting, perfectly organized, calm on the surface, and already hinting that what I was about to learn would change everything I thought I knew. The first folder was labeled Real Investments, with a firm note saying not to open it, written as if he expected someone like me to find it one day, but I opened it anyway because I had to know the truth. Inside were pages filled with losses, one after another, showing failed stocks, collapsed companies, and risky ventures that vanished without a trace, all tied to accounts I had never seen before. These were secret accounts opened only in his name, listing enormous losses at different banks and firms, and as I read the numbers, my mind struggled to grasp how much of our shared life had quietly slipped away. The second folder was even more painful, filled with urgent loan papers that made my hands shake as I realized our family home had been used as security without my knowledge. The house where I raised my children, cared for the garden, and built decades of memories had been placed at risk through multiple loans that added up to a crushing amount. I felt dizzy as the weight of it settled in, barely able to steady myself as the room seemed to close in. Then I opened the third folder, and that was the moment everything truly fell apart because it contained multiple credit card accounts opened in my name, using my personal details but signed with a handwriting that only tried to look like mine. It looked almost the same as my signature, but it wasn't mine. It was forged. My own husband had stolen my identity. I checked the cards one by one, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. A Discover card with a $10,000 limit, overdrawn by $2,000. A Capital One card capped at $15,000, pushed past $17,000. An Amex with an $8,000 limit, nearly double that in debt. 15 cards in total. Every single one maxed out. Every single one drowning in interest. All in my name. My social security number. My date of birth. My life. The total sat there in cold black ink. $110,000. Debt I never agreed to. Purchases I never made. Payments I never authorized. He had done it all quietly, methodically, wearing my name like a mask, destroying my credit and turning me into a debtor without my knowledge. That I don't know how long I sat there staring at those folders. Time lost its meaning. 10 minutes, an hour, maybe longer. That small white room felt sealed off from the world, like a vacuum where nothing moved and nothing breathed. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How could the man who promised to protect me do this? Then the memories rushed in. Every time I didn't ask questions. Every document I signed without reading. Every moment he smiled and said, "Let me handle it." And I let him. Because trust was easier than doubt. Because love, I thought, meant believing. After 38 years of marriage, you don't just trust a person. You trust the story you've built together. Even when that story isn't true. At the bottom of the box, beneath all the damage, was one last thing. An envelope made of thick cream paper, expensive and deliberate. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. The handwriting I knew by heart. The one that wrote love notes when we were young. The one that signed school forms, birthday cards, Christmas cards. Every "I love you" he ever gave me. I opened it, and to my surprise my hands were steady. The shock had burned itself out. The pain had gone numb. What remained was something colder and sharper. A clean, focused rage. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long. I began to read. "Eulalia, my love. If you are reading this, then I am already gone and you have found the box. You have seen everything. Now you know. I'm so sorry. I know these words mean very little. I know apologies cannot fix what I've done. But I need to explain. I need you to understand, even if you never forgive me." 5 years earlier, he wrote, a new business opportunity appeared in his life. It was a construction company with large city projects and promises of steady profits. Introduced by someone he once trusted from college. He believed it was safe and convinced himself it would secure our future, giving me comfort, travel, and peace in later years. Acting on that belief, he invested everything we had, our savings, retirement money, and long-term plans, thinking he could quickly recover the risk without ever worrying me. Instead, the company collapsed, the man disappeared, and nearly all our life savings were gone. Fear took over, and instead of telling me the truth, he tried to repair the damage alone by taking loans against our home, one after another, each time hoping the next attempt would fix everything. When banks stopped trusting him, he secretly used accounts in my name, believing it would only be temporary and that I would never find out. His weekly bank visits were not routine errands but desperate attempts to delay the consequences and keep the truth hidden. In the end, he admitted that the house was in danger, our finances were broken, and my credit had been damaged, all because of his choices. He accepted full responsibility, knowing the pain he caused, and acknowledged that anger and disappointment were justified. He ended the letter by admitting that while he believed he was shielding me from his failures, he had only pushed the burden onto my shoulders instead. He said he didn't ask for forgiveness because he knew he hadn't earned it, only understanding, and explained that each bad choice was an attempt to fix the one before it until everything spiraled beyond control. He insisted that his love for me over all those years was real, even if it wasn't enough to protect me from the damage he caused, and asked me to look after our children and tell them the truth in a gentle way. I folded the letter carefully, returned every paper to its place, and stood up with unsteady legs but a clear mind, determined not to break in that moment. When the bank manager asked if I was all right, I answered honestly and requested copies of every document along with the name of a strong lawyer, making it clear I was ready to act. Sitting in the lobby afterward, watching people go about their normal routines, I understood that my world had shifted completely, and when I finally returned home to find Langston waiting, I knew the next chapter would be painful but necessary. That I told him not to worry because I hadn't answered the phone on purpose, and while things were far from fine, I assured him I would get through it. He noticed the thick folder in my hands and asked what it was, and I told him to sit down and call his sister because both of them needed to hear this together. When Zadie arrived, her eyes were swollen from days of crying, and I knew what I was about to say would hurt her deeply, but the truth could not wait any longer. The three of us sat at the kitchen table where we had shared so many happy moments, and I began laying out the papers one by one, explaining that they came from a secret bank box their father had kept hidden for years. As Langston read the records of failed investments, I watched his face tighten with shock, and when Zadie finally understood, Her color faded as she realized the scale of the loss. I explained that the money was spent without my knowledge and that our home had been used to secure large loans, putting everything we built at risk. When I placed the credit statements on the table and explained that accounts had been opened using my personal details, both of them fell silent, finally understanding that the man they loved had made choices that changed all our lives forever. Langston turned pale and said this was serious wrongdoing, something that should never have happened, and Zadie kept asking why their father would do such a thing, unable to match this truth with the man she loved. I handed them the letter and told them to read it because it was his explanation, or at least his attempt to justify his actions, and hearing it out loud felt like reopening a wound with every sentence. When Langston finished reading, the room fell into a deep, heavy silence, the kind that follows a shock no one was prepared for, and he finally asked how I could stay so calm when everything I owned and worked for had been damaged. I told them that anger would not help us now, that panic would only slow us down, and that what we needed was a clear plan and the strength to face reality together. Zadie cried and said she couldn't accept it because she believed her father was dependable and honest, and I gently told her I believed that once too, but the truth was now in front of us. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying years of ignored signs and tense moments, and by morning I knew that protecting a false image would only leave us buried under problems we did not create. No matter how painful that realization was, I told her that he could love his family and still take from me, and that both truths could exist at the same time, even if it hurt to accept. Zadie cried harder, saying people would talk, judge us, and say terrible things about our family, and I answered that I would rather face honest words than continue living behind a false story. She left the house upset, closing the door behind her, and later Langston called to say his sister was overwhelmed and needed time, though I wasn't sure when or if she would truly understand. A few days later, I met with attorney Althea Dubois in her downtown office, a calm and focused woman who listened closely as I shared everything I had discovered, from the hidden losses to the accounts opened in my name and the letter explaining it all. When I finished, she spoke plainly and said this was not simple money trouble but a long pattern of serious financial wrongdoing that had damaged my stability over many years. She explained that even though my husband was gone, we could still challenge the debts, protect my home if possible, and work to restore my financial record, though the process would be long, demanding, and costly. When I asked how much it would take to begin, she answered honestly, saying the legal fees would be around $30,000 plus additional expenses, and I realized that this fight would test not just my strength, but my resolve to reclaim my future. The total cost came to around $445,000. And when I thought about the little money left in my account and the mountain of debt, I knew I couldn't afford it up front. The lawyer calmly suggested a different approach, asking for a smaller amount to begin and setting up a payment plan for the rest, assuring me this was a case worth fighting and one she intended to win. That evening I called Langston and explained everything, including the fees and the plan, and after a quiet pause he offered his own savings meant for home repairs, insisting it was his way of standing by me. I refused at first, but his firm support broke through, and for the first time since my husband's death, I cried openly, not from loss but from deep gratitude. Zadie, however, pulled away and sent a brief message saying she needed distance because she couldn't accept what was happening, choosing silence over discussion. The weeks that followed were filled with endless paperwork as the lawyer moved quickly, disputing every debt, contacting banks, and building a strong case piece by piece. We even brought in a handwriting expert who carefully reviewed every document and confirmed that the signatures were not mine, explaining the subtle differences that proved they were imitations. Hearing that truth confirmed was painful, but it strengthened my resolve, because each step forward meant reclaiming a part of my life that had been taken without my knowledge. Thaddeus had spent years studying my handwriting, learning it well enough to steal from me without raising suspicion. Langston quickly became my partner in uncovering the truth. He meticulously organized every file, created spreadsheets tracking each failed investment, loan, and credit card, and built a detailed timeline showing when each act of fraud happened. He met with bank managers, investigated every lead, and approached it all with relentless determination. One evening, as we sat surrounded by papers at the kitchen table, he looked at me nervously. "Mama, there's something I need to tell you," he said. My stomach tightened. About 3 years ago, Pop came to me with a so-called guaranteed investment, a construction company promising secure profits in 6 months. He wanted me to invest $50,000, Langston admitted. My heart sank. You didn't give him the money? I asked, barely breathing. Almost, Mama. Almost. It was $50,000 from my 401k, meant for the kids' future. But Karen didn't agree. She asked why Pop needed our money if the deal was so safe and guaranteed, and she refused. We argued, but in the end I didn't invest. Langston's eyes filled with guilt. I think he was already in trouble. He needed my money to cover his losses. If I'd said yes, we would have lost everything too. I reached across the table and held his hand tightly. You didn't invest. Thank goodness. You saved us. And you know what that shows me? That your father was struggling, overwhelmed, and when people are in that kind of desperate state, they grab at anything, or anyone, without realizing the consequences. He would have kept asking others for help, friends, relatives, anyone, just to stay afloat. In that desperation, the sense of right and wrong gets blurry or sometimes is ignored entirely. 3 months after Thaddeus passed, we had our first win. 2 credit card companies acknowledged the signatures were forged and removed $23,000 in debt from my credit report. It wasn't everything, not by far, but it proved that truth could prevail even if slowly. Zadie still wouldn't speak to me. Calls, texts, messages, all blocked. Langston reminded me that she needed time, but it stung deeply. Losing my husband and feeling my daughter drift away in the same year was crushing. The fight over the house loans was more complicated. The bank argued that, as Thaddeus's wife, I benefited from the loans, even if I didn't know about them. Attorney Dubois countered firmly. The funds were in his accounts, spent on failed investments before I ever knew they existed. I was a victim, not an accomplice. She warned me we'd have to go to court, that a judge would ultimately decide if I was responsible for debts incurred through fraud, even as a spouse. Are we going to win? I asked. He paused, honest as always. I think so. We have a strong case, but I can't guarantee it. The law is complicated. The hearing was set for September, 6 months after Thaddeus died. 6 months that felt like 6 years. In those weeks leading up to court, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started looking for a job.at60. I knew I wasn't exactly what employers were lining up for. I had spent most of my life running a home, then worked as an English teacher at language schools after my children grew up, and I had retired 2 years earlier with dreams of travel, family time, and finally enjoying life. Instead, I found myself applying everywhere. Clothing shops, cafes, supermarkets, any place willing to give someone my age a fresh start. One call changed everything. An interview at the Wheatley Language Institute in Germantown. The owner, Miss Ida May, was in her 70s with bright white hair, red glasses, and a warm, steady presence. She looked at my simple resume and asked why I wanted to work again. I could have given a polite excuse, but I was done pretending. I told her the truth, that my husband had passed away, that I discovered serious financial damage afterward, and that I was fighting to keep my home. She listened quietly, then smiled with understanding, not pity, and asked when I could start. I began the next week, working afternoons 3 days a week. The pay wasn't much, but it gave me something far more valuable: purpose, structure, and dignity. Teaching again reminded me who I was, and slowly I felt like myself returning. Miss Ida May had her own story, and like everyone, it shaped who she was. One afternoon, while we were tidying books in the teacher's lounge, she shared that she had been married for 12 years but ended it 30 years ago, and it had been the best choice of her life. Her ex-husband hadn't been dishonest with money, at least not that she knew, but he had lied in every other way. Other women, other lives, different versions of himself, changing daily depending on who was watching. She straightened a stack of grammar books and said something that stayed with me. The people telling you to try harder, to be more understanding, more patient, or more tolerant, usually never had to try for real. They never had to choose between keeping a lie alive or saving their own life. That hit me exactly. I was saving my own life, even if it cost Thaddeus's memory, my relationship with Zadie, even everything. Court day arrived on a Thursday in September. The sky was gray, the threat of rain looming, but it held off. Langston came with me, dressed in a sharp suit. I wore navy blue, our outfits formal, almost like attending a wedding rather than a battle. Zadie ignored every invitation. Text, email, total silence, except for a brief message through Langston the night before. She couldn't watch me challenge her father's name. I replied through Langston, understanding but firm, telling her I loved her anyway. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected. Nothing like the movies. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, a Pennsylvania state flag in the corner, humming air conditioning. Judge Percal W. Sterling, around 60 with gray hair and thick glasses, presided. Attorney Dubois had researched him and assured me he was fair, strict with evidence but impartial. The bank's lawyer, a young man in his 30s with the polished confidence of someone who had never lost anything, argued first, insisting that as Thaddeus's wife living in the house tied to the loans, I was automatically responsible, even without signing or knowing anything. Your Honor, he said firmly, the financial institution acted in good faith. The bank lawyer spoke first, explaining that all loans had been granted following proper procedures, with verified documents and recorded approvals, and argued that even if the spouse claimed she didn't know, it didn't void the contracts, especially since she appeared to benefit indirectly. When Attorney Dubois rose, she may have been smaller in stature, but her presence immediately filled the room. Your Honor, my client benefited from nothing, she began firmly. The loan amounts went exclusively into accounts in her deceased husband's name, accounts she never knew existed. The funds were used for failed investments before she ever saw, approved, or participated in any of them. She presented the forged signatures and the affidavit from a retired forensic handwriting expert with 30 years of experience, confirming, these are not Aaliyah Vance's signatures. They are forgeries, good ones but forgeries. She was the victim of identity theft by her own husband. Then she showed Thaddeus's letter, a full confession of every debt, every lie, every forgery. This is not spousal negligence, Your Honor. This is criminal fraud. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, Langston paced nervously while Attorney Dubois checked messages. I sat on a hard wooden bench, hands folded, heart heavy with thoughts of Zadie, my daughter struggling to accept her father's betrayal, still holding on to the illusion instead of the truth. Langston, trying to comfort me, said, "You were great in there, Mama," even though I hadn't spoken yet. I nodded quietly, my mind focused not on the trial, but on whether one day Zadie could forgive me for speaking the truth aloud. After an hour and 15 minutes, they called us back into the courtroom. Attorney Dubois called me to the stand and I took my seat, placed my hand on the Bible and promised to speak only the truth. She asked when I first learned about the loans and I explained that I discovered them 4 days after my husband passed, when I opened a safety deposit box he had never mentioned in nearly 4 decades of marriage. I made it clear that he had never told me about using our home as collateral, that I never received a single dollar from those loans, and that the money went into accounts I didn't even know existed. I also stated plainly that I did not sign any loan documents. Then the bank's lawyer stood up for questioning, confident and sharp in tone, and asked if I had trusted my husband with all financial matters. I said yes, I trusted him, but trusting someone is not the same as agreeing to be misled or having your identity misused. He suggested I benefited from the loans because I lived in the house, and I answered that it was my home too, one we built and paid for together over 40 years, and one he endangered without my knowledge or consent. When asked how I could miss signs after so many years, I took a steady breath and explained that my husband appeared careful, structured, and dependable, and that he hid his actions behind routine, redirected paperwork and quiet control. I trusted because I believed marriage meant partnership, not constant suspicion, and that trust is exactly how he kept me in the dark for so long. Because in all 38 years he had never given me a single reason not to trust him. I paused, admitting I had been naive, maybe even foolish, but naivety is not consent for fraud. And being trusting doesn't mean I authorized him to ruin my financial life. The lawyer tried to press on, but the judge raised his hand. I've heard enough. I will review the evidence and issue my decision. Then came a 2-hour recess that felt endless. Langston bought coffee from the courthouse cafeteria. Terrible, cold, watery coffee, but we drank it anyway, needing to do something with our hands to ease the nerves. Attorney Dubois remained calm, telling me my testimony had been perfect, truthful and compelling with solid proof behind it. We're going to win, she said, and if not, we appeal to the Superior Court, but that won't be necessary. Trust me. When we were called back, Judge Sterling was already seated, documents stacked before him, our lives reduced to papers. His voice was deliberate as he began. He had reviewed the forged signatures, the expert opinion, my consistent testimony, and the deceased husband's own written confession admitting every act of fraud. He addressed the bank lawyer. While he understood the institution's position on spousal benefit, he could not ignore the overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud carried out without my knowledge or consent. Then came the sharp strike of the gavel. I am ruling in favor of the defendant. The loans were obtained through fraud and are therefore void. The liens on the property are cancelled. The house remains solely in the name of Eulalia Vance, free of any encumbrances. Langston squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. Attorney Dubois smiled, a small, professional yet genuine smile. For the first time in months, a weight lifted from my chest. We had won. The house was safe. But stepping out onto the cold September street, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion and emptiness. I had won the property and cleared my name, yes, but I had also lost a marriage I thought I understood, a partner I thought I knew, and possibly a daughter who might never forgive me for revealing the truth. That night my cell phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer the phone, but something made me pick it up. Mama, it was Zadie, her voice breaking and trembling like she had been crying for hours. Hi baby, I whispered. I need to tell you something. Can I come over? Of course, anytime, I said. She arrived within 30 minutes, eyes red and swollen, makeup streaked, hair messy, holding a folder tightly in her hands. Without a word, she sat at the kitchen table and set it down. After the hearing today, I went to the bank, she said, voice shaking. I asked to see all of Daddy's records, even the ones from the lawsuit. I wanted to prove you were wrong, that there had to be some mistake, something different. She took a deep breath and continued. But you weren't wrong. Everything you said was true. Every document, every forged signature, every secret. And there's more, Mama. Much more. My chest tightened. More? I asked. Yes, she said, opening the folder. He had credit cards in my name too. 5 of them. I never opened them. Never knew about them. But they're here with my social security number and a signature that isn't mine. How much? I asked quietly. $28,000, she said, her voice barely audible. I tried to buy a refrigerator last week on an installment plan. They denied me. They said my credit history was bad and I didn't even know why. I felt the weight of his betrayal all over again. Zadie, I'm so sorry. I should have... No, Mama, she interrupted, shaking her head. I should have believed you. I should have listened. I just couldn't imagine Daddy doing this. He was my dad. He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, walked me down the aisle, cried when my babies were born. How could the same man do this, steal my identity and betray us? Her words hung in the room, heavy, full of disbelief, but also the beginning of understanding. I reached across the table and held her hands. In that moment, both versions of her father felt real. The loving dad she remembered and the man who made devastating choices. People are complicated. They can care for you deeply and still cause unimaginable pain. Zadie began to cry, the kind of raw, soul-deep cry that you can't hold back. I stood, walked around the table and hugged her, letting her lean on me like she did as a child when she fell from the swing. We stayed wrapped in that embrace for a long time. Attorney Dubois guided Zadie just as she had guided me, filing disputes, contacting credit bureaus and building the case. The handwriting expert confirmed that none of Zadie's signatures were real. They were forged by Thaddeus. Langston, Zadie and I sat in my living room surrounded by papers, maps and plans, slowly figuring out how to rebuild our lives. We'll get through this together, Langston said, and I believed him. Not because it would be easy, but because finally, we were facing the truth and no longer pretending that silence meant peace. The language school became my sanctuary more than a job. It gave me purpose and a reason to feel needed. Miss Ida May taught me about administration, lesson planning, inventory, and gave me the space to heal. One afternoon, a woman in her 40s wandered into the school looking lost. Can I help you? I asked. She hesitated, then quietly said, Do you have materials on financial abuse in marriage? My heart tightened. I led her to a small section of self-help books, picked 3 titles and handed them to her. On a sudden impulse I said, I've been through this myself. If you want to talk, I'm here. She looked shocked but grateful. And then we spoke for over an hour, sharing stories, fears and hope. My husband says I'm paranoid, my mama says I exaggerate, but you believed me. May looked at me with a small smile. You're good at this. At what? I asked. At listening without judgment, at seeing the person behind the problem. I thought of Zadie's initial disbelief, and of the friends who drifted away when I spoke about Thaddeus, uncomfortable with the complexity and the harsh truth. I know what it's like not to be believed, I said simply. In the following months, More women came, somehow hearing about the support quietly through word of mouth, social media, or church. Some came to buy books, others just to talk, each carrying stories that mirrored my own. Miss Ida suggested something more formal. How about a monthly support group here in the back room? Only women who have experienced financial abuse. Do you think anyone would come? I asked. You'd be surprised. We placed a small ad in the Philadelphia Tribune and posted on the school's social media. Support group for women affected by financial abuse. First Tuesday of every month, 7 p.m. free. At the first meeting, 12 women showed up. More than I expected. We arranged chairs in a circle, made coffee, laid out cookies. I shared my story. The Tuesdays at the bank, the secret safety deposit box, the forged documents, the court battle, the daughter who didn't believe, and the slow, painful rebuilding. Silence followed, heavy and complete. Then one by one they began to speak. One told of her husband selling her car without her knowledge. Another of an ex who emptied their joint account and vanished. Another of a father who stole her inheritance. Different stories, same pattern. Control, isolation, lies. How did you stay strong? One woman asked. I answered honestly, I didn't always. I cried. I screamed. I was terrified. I spent nights awake, whole days barely eating. But I kept going because giving up wasn't an option. I had already spent too many years letting others decide for me. The group grew steadily. 17 women at the second meeting, 22 at the third, and by the fourth, we needed a larger room at a community center in Germantown to fit everyone. We shared everything we had. Names of trustworthy lawyers, tips for rebuilding credit, strategies for dealing with family who didn't understand, helpful websites, financial apps, and knowledge that could have saved me years of pain. One evening, after a long emotional meeting, Miss Ida May and I were left organizing chairs. She looked at me and said, "You know what you're doing here, right? This isn't just a support group, you're creating a legacy. Everything that tried to destroy you, all the money, the credit, the security Thaddeus took, you're turning it into something powerful. You're using your pain to help other women. You're transforming hurt into purpose." I paused, thinking about the word, transformation. For so long I tried to reclaim the life I'd lost, to go back to who I was before Thaddeus betrayed me. But maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe the point was to become someone new, someone stronger, shaped by betrayal, loss, and the hard work of rebuilding. 1 year after Thaddeus's death, we held the group's anniversary meeting. 28 women in a circle, some longtime members, some newcomers, all connected by having trusted someone who broke that trust. I looked around and realized that while my old life had ended with him, my marriage, my plans, my sense of security, a new version of me was emerging. Wiser, stronger, more cautious, but also more compassionate, because I now understood the pain of deception by someone you love. I spoke openly. What Thaddeus did was wrong, legally, morally, ethically. I won't excuse it, I won't soften it. But what I chose to do afterward was my choice. I could have stayed trapped in anger and despair. Instead, I chose to rebuild, to move forward, and to help other women do the same. After the meeting, a young woman approached me, no older than 35, her eyes red from crying. "My husband handles all our money," she said. "He says I don't understand finances, that I should just let him manage it. But something feels wrong. I can't explain it, I just know it's wrong." I held her hands gently. "Trust that feeling," I told her. "Your instincts are more powerful than you realize." I told her firmly, "Ask questions. Ask to see the bills, the statements, the investments. Don't let anyone, even someone you love deeply, keep you in the dark about your own money. And if I'm wrong, if I'm being paranoid, yes, he might get angry and you might feel embarrassed for 5 minutes, but you'll be safe. You apologize, move on, and you know you were protecting yourself. But if you're right and you don't check, you could lose everything." I squeezed her hands. Everything. The next month she returned with documents. Her husband had been siphoning money from their joint account, investing in cryptocurrency without her knowledge, losing $87,000. She had filed for divorce. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her hands shaking. "I don't know how I'll survive, but I feel free for the first time in years." I understood completely. Months passed. Zadie's credit was restored, just like mine. Langston invested his savings in a secure 529 plan for his children's college, untouchable by anyone else. I kept working at the language school 3 days a week, managing the support group, which had grown into a small nonprofit. On what would have been my 39th wedding anniversary, I went to a different bank, a credit union in Fishtown, far from where Thaddeus had any presence, to open a new account in my name alone. I deposited my modest paycheck from the school, $1,800 earned honestly with my work, my effort, my rebuilding. The teller smiled. Anything else I can help you with today, ma'am? I paused. Yes, I said. I'd like to change the name on the account. She handed me a pen. How would you like it to read? Aaliyah Chestnut, I said, my maiden name, reclaiming my identity and my life. I wanted to reclaim who I was before the marriage, before Thaddeus, before 38 years of trust turned to ashes. At the credit union, the teller typed into the system, "Done, Miss Chestnut. Your account is updated." I smiled to myself. Miss Chestnut, no longer Mrs. Vance, no longer Thaddeus's wife, just Aaliyah, just me. Walking out into the warm spring sunlight, fresh air and blue sky, I felt something I hadn't in over a year: clarity. I knew exactly who I was. If anything in my story feels familiar to you, the locked doors, the secret accounts, the uneasy feeling that something isn't right, trust that instinct. Ask questions, demand answers, review documents, bills, statements. Love is never an excuse for secrecy or control. Real love is partnership, transparency, and respect. And if you find betrayal, if your world collapses, remember this: you are stronger than anyone who tried to break you. You are still here, breathing, surviving, capable of rebuilding. It will hurt, it will be hard, and some days you'll feel like giving up. But you won't, because you are a survivor. I rebuilt my life, and so can you. Believe in me, and more importantly, believe in yourself. Never let anyone keep you in the dark about your own life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, you can support me with a super thanks, so I can continue sharing more life stories. Thank you for your support, and don't forget to subscribe. On the screen you'll see 2 more stories I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting for you.